Hello, 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 hello. Welcome, everyone. We have so many people in the waiting room, so we'll just give them a second to transition over. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are logging in from. We are happy to have you join us today. Right. All right. Well, good morning and welcome. Good afternoon to those of you that are joining us on the East Coast, and good morning to those that are joining us on the West Coast. We are so excited to have you here today. My name is Jamie Singletary, and I am the Director of Clinical Brand Development for Within Health. And I also have the pleasure of hosting our educational presentations for staff and our external supporters. So, with that being said, I am going to just introduce my colleague, Rebecca Brumm, who is the Chief Clinical Officer at Within Health. Rebecca brings nearly 2 decades of experience and heartfelt dedication to her role. A proud graduate of Central Michigan University, Rebecca is deeply committed to the integration of mind, body, and soul, an ethos that shapes both her relationship and clinical approach. Since beginning her career as a therapist in 2005, Rebecca has guided clients through a wide range of mental health challenges. She is especially passionate about helping individuals improve body image, rebuild self worth, and recover from eating disorders. Her work is grounded in compassion, authenticity, and a belief in the transformative power of healing from within. So today we are welcoming you to our talk. We will not be providing copies of our slides, but for your convenience, we have attached a handout that will go directly with this presentation to your CEO dashboard, and we will also have a recording of today's talk as well at your CEO dashboard. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Rebecca Brumm.
Okay, let me get the slides pulled up for everyone. And let's go ahead and start the slideshow. You can see my screen just fine, Jamie?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for joining this presentation today. The presentation has my tummy a little tied up in knots today because it is really a talk that is very close to my heart. Two areas that I'm really passionate about and want to really deliver good information to all of you and insight and perspective on grief and eating disorders and the intersection between the two.
Rebecca, I'm sorry, we do not see your slides. We actually see a different screen.
Oh, okay. Hang on just a second. I think you still see what I don't intend for you to.
So right now we just see your lovely face.
Okay. Uh, Next up. Now you see my true nature with 5,000 tabs.
We do. There we go. Now we see your slide.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Glad that we got that situated. Forgive me, I will be looking to the side just a little bit. I'm going to position myself here as we look at the dual monitors, but I want you to more see my face than the side of my face here. Okay, so today we're talking about grief and eating disorders. Hopefully you did get my little introduction there. I My intention for you today is to be able to gain an understanding and to feel more comfortable with people as they're walking through their grief. To leave here with a greater understanding about what happens for somebody when they are in the midst of grief, what might be a little more normal than we would think. We'll give you some tools to help clients walk through that process and to gain resilience and meaning and growth as a part of walking through that process. And then to also have an understanding of how grief can complicate and play into, and can also be a part of eating disorder recovery. Will achieve these, I'm thinking treatment plan, will achieve these goals and objectives through the agenda of looking at the past theories of grief, but also looking at how those kind of painted a picture for us that no longer corresponds with current understandings of grief. So we'll talk about now what are some of the current understanding of grief, and how we can target interventions around that. We'll take some time to look at the way that grief overlaps with eating disorder care. And interestingly, it's such a niche population that there isn't a ton of research on it. So I think it's also interesting to have some clinical perspective from all of us on that. We'll talk about what the role of the clinician or the provider might be in all of this process. And then lastly, I'd love to leave you with some interventions for working with somebody who's walking through either grief from the loss of a loved one, or who is grieving the loss of their eating disorder. So just a quick slide about me, nothing that I'm going to truly highlight, except for the fact that I come to you, as Jamie has shared, with some years of experience in the eating disorder treatment world. And I'll be talking through that lens as a clinician, but also going to be talking through the lens of somebody who has lost people. So on the left-hand side, you can see is my brother-in-law when he was 37, and my husband and I were 35. He found out he had cancer, and within a year, he had passed away. And that was about 10 years ago at this time. And it was such a tragic event for his family, for his parents, for my in laws, for his grandparents. And so, really had firsthand experience of being in this, walking in the center of a family experiencing tremendous grief and loss. And then about 5 years later, I experienced the death of my mother. So, this is a picture of her and myself and all of my sisters on my sister's wedding day. And she passed away about 6 months later. And in that experience, I really felt lost myself. It was such a hard experience. And the way that I work, and probably many of you as clinicians work, I wanted to figure out, like, okay, I'm coming to this feeling pretty well equipped as a clinician, and still feeling so brokenhearted, and so just unsure how to navigate this process. So I did the normal thing, which is pursue a grief certificate, and just like understanding grief and digging into what do we know about this? How do we do this? How do I do this in a way that's productive and healthy, and that's going to contribute to my growth. And that experience has given me such a life-changing opportunity to walk with other patients through through their loss and through their heartache. And I've gained such incredible experience from that. So more so than the clinical end of me today is the personal end of me, that I hope to share experience of both. So, as an eating disorder clinician, I have gravitated to this quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, because it speaks to I think as eating disorder clinicians, we say we get to define the terms of what beauty is and what health is, and we empower our clients to do that. And this quote to me really speaks to our ability to define beauty, not only in the eating disorder space, but in the context of grief as well. So I will read that to you. The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of those depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. So I warned Jamie I might get a little teary eyed on this slide, but I hope you can see that even today, even 5 years later, that it can ring true for people. Those emotions can be present. And a lot of what we do is hold the both and. You can feel the loss, you can feel the emotions, you can feel the experience, and also continue. So I've done a little bit of experimenting with my colleagues and just asking them these questions. How do you feel about grief? What are some of the first things that come up for you as you think about grief or loss? And how do you feel about like a client who walks into your office and is asking for help about this? And these are some of the feedback that I've gotten. Feeling about it, feeling overwhelmed, feeling like it bogs them down or makes them feel heavy. Um, Sometimes they feel like they can only imagine how that might feel, and they aren't sure that they would even be able to make it out of the suffering that their client is experiencing. They feel afraid. They might feel dismissive, or they might feel like the patient is overreacting. And how they feel about approaching it, they can feel really incapable. They can feel really, ill prepared. They can feel frustrated that the process is moving so slow and worried that the patient may not be getting better. They can feel stuck. They can feel their own fear. Sometimes, if I think about some of the people who have lost children that I've worked with, there can also be a fear that, like, I'm afraid that that could happen to me. I'm afraid that I wouldn't survive that loss. I'm afraid of the vicarious trauma that I might experience of that. So I want to put a name to that. I think so much of what we can do with grief work is allow space to be unafraid to call things what they are, to name those experiences. And I want to start by first naming them for us here. When we think about and we liken grief to trauma, I think that it helps us to put it into perspective. Many of us are really well versed in working with people that have had traumatic experiences. So when we put grief through the lens and loss through the lens of trauma, we can really understand it in what feels like a more empowered and capable way clinically. So when we think about grief as a trauma and relate the two, the loss is perceived to be inescapable. This is one of those things that has been so interesting to watch and experience for myself. So many things in life can be made better or can maybe have a fix, or we can look for ways to make them more palatable or make them more um, not so challenging, or to make them better. But grief really is, and loss is really everlasting. It's unchangeable, and that really goes hand in hand with the definition of trauma. um, Grief does confront a person with actual loss. And I also think about it being a limbic system injury, right? There is an injury to the person, and when their normal coping people, their regulating people, are not a part of their system for regulating, that's even more of a consuming hit to them. It does overwhelm our coping abilities. It creates significant distress and dysfunction, especially for a time period. And it violates our assumptive world. Our assumptive world is that this person is there, that this person will be there, will continue to be there, is a strong part of their system of support. And that absolutely is violated in the terms of that person is no longer there and won't be able to be a part of that world. Freud was one of the first people to look at determining the best way to approach grief. And he said that really the goal of grief is to detach, to accept that that person is gone out of your life, that they aren't coming back, and to move forward with your life. to the nth of believing that any ongoing attachment with that individual is pathological. And probably the one that most audience members are familiar with is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. She coined the idea that there were 5 stages to grief that included denial that the grief actually took place, then moving into anger as the person started to acknowledge that it did, and that it was real. And then bargaining. I'll do anything, I'll change anything, I'll go to any end to make this different, to just get things back the way that they were, to depression and realizing that that was not possible. And then finally working into acceptance. And while there's a lot of good information and good knowledge about the ways that people can feel about their loss, this was never intended to be used as an understanding of how we move through loss. It was actually created through the research that she did in people coming to terms with their own terminal illness. So it doesn't have the same applicability. And I think when it has had its most ill intended uh, approach, it is when people feel like, okay, I went through the denial and I went through anger and I went through bargaining, but why the hell am I back at anger again? Like I thought that I already went through that. And it can be really dysregulating for people to have a belief that they should be working through different stages. And once they've got out of this stage and they move into the next stage, that circumstances and the grief process won't catapult them back into other stages and phases. So it's important that we understand where that belief, where this knowledge came from, but also that it's not meant to be applied in that exact same way. So let's talk about what we know today about grief interventions and about just the theories and the approaches to grief. So building on that, there is no universality or emotional trajectory. I'm going to move us around here. Okay. There's no right way to walk through the steps of grief. Kind of like we've seen the line that kind of goes like this for recovery. Here's where you start, here's where you end in recovery, and the whole journey is just all over the place. It's not predictable. Everybody's experience is different. We can expect that from grief. As a complete generality, in my experience, in my own experience, and in working with patients through grief, I see that the first year is extremely difficult, is really, really hard, even to the end that some people don't feel like that they'll ever be okay again. It may feel like some of their darkest times in a way that it's hard for them to believe that their life will ever feel better. So that first year is really hard. And then after the first year, sometimes into the second year can kind of feel like I'm not having my firsts without them anymore. Now I'm building years where they're not a part of things, and that is hard. But I have also found that within 5 years, many of those things will be much easier. Um, Maybe you'll be able to celebrate that person's birthday or anniversary of their death in a way that doesn't feel so emotionally dysregulating. And I think it's fair to say that it's normal for there to be moments where it feels as difficult as that first year felt. So there can be times in that person's life where they feel the weight of that loss so intensely, and that is not a pathological thing. It's their ability to recognize it, to feel it, to regulate, and then to continue on that we want to see. And I will say just about prolonged grief disorder, which we won't talk about here. We'll more so talk about what we can expect from a normal grieving process. But prolonged grief disorder is something that isn't diagnosed until the first year after somebody's experienced a loss. And I just point that out to normalize the that first year being difficult. We also no longer require people for their well being to let go. Actually, the opposite is true. A continued bond is considered healthy and is seen as really facilitating wellness for the sufferer. We'll talk about some of the interventions are establishing relationships with people have lost loved ones, ways that they might feel their presence in their lives, ways that they might communicate or have communication back with them or feel kind of guided in their lives by those people, and that's actually associated with well-being. This one really was really validating in learning it. And I think it's one of the most difficult things that people experience. The loss requires new learning. So, almost if we think about that first year of grieving, is learning a new language. It's difficult and it's uncomfortable and it is. It may bump up against other things that we know. So to paint a picture of this, if you can visualize an internal Google Map system. So if you woke up in the middle of the night last night and you left your lights off and maybe went out to the kitchen to get something to drink or went to the bathroom, you probably could have navigated your house very easily in the dark because your brain has created an internal map of how your life operates. And it does this with people as well. But let's say there was a Lego on the floor, or there was a piece of furniture that was where it wasn't supposed to be, and it violated that assumptive world, violated the Google map. You would have data that would come in and correct that, would correct your experience. So a lot of times people feel the most pain when they are operating from that internalized process of what they expect to be happening. And they're shocked time and time again by the realization, the correction of the incoming data that that person is no longer there. So I'm thinking about a past client who with a pet, she lost a pet, and for months the first thing she would do is go and put food in the dog dish and put it down. And somewhere in that process, her heart would feel like it was breaking again when she realized she didn't need to do that. But when we can express that what is happening is new learning, and that the thoughts about the thoughts, right? The CBT of it is can be thoughts like, what's wrong with me? That hurts so much again. Am I ever going to remember and normalize or not do these things that are creating so much suffering for me? Another tenet of what we know about grief is that the loss will change you. You will be different on the other side of it. Some things, and there is a huge opportunity for you to grow. We'll talk about resilience as being the most predicted outcome of loss. Um, Many times people report that loss will make them, like the quote I shared, more hardy, more appreciative, more grateful, more in touch with the things that are here and present in their lives. But when people are grieving a loss, they are also grieving the person that they were before their loss. And they will also have to work through who was I with that person? Who am I without that person? how did that person help me to meet my core needs, and how do I get those needs met now? And that process can be difficult. And so knowing that our clients are walking that path and working those things out and doing that new learning is helpful for us to know what's going on as they're navigating that. And then this one is probably one of the least expected and most important pieces for me to have experienced as a clinician. So the person's support network will also be impacted. So if the client that you're working with experience a loss, and that loss has also affected their social support network or their community circle, then those people will also be changed and will also be suffering and going through their own experience. And oftentimes, especially in a family system, the family system will change in response to that loss. Grief is a very isolating experience. And so the family system may move apart from one another, may kind of go into their own spaces and deal with their own experience individually, and then may find that their needs for that are so different. Example, the mother in a situation I'm thinking of really has done a lot of feeling sad. And the son in a situation has felt resentful towards the loss, maybe has even felt that it's a burden that's been lifted from the family. They are experiencing this in a very different way. And then the need to connect and feel similarly is also pulling them apart. So they've experienced the loss of their loved one, and they've also experienced the loss of support from one another. So this can make it very difficult for the person and can lead to them feeling very alone. Now, I'm going to put a pause in that for just a second. And make a plug for the fact that a clinician in these circumstances can be so important. And I'll circle back to that. I have a couple of slides about that. But I do want to acknowledge that that slide can feel kind of heavy. You can feel kind of the depth of the loss and the ripple effect of that. So I want to put some hope out there in clinicians can serve a really helpful purpose in what they can carry and the perspectives that they can hold and their ability to not be in the inner circle of feeling that loss. But let's take a second and look at the intersection between grief and eating disorders. So, of course, it makes sense, and many of us have seen that experiencing significant loss can be a precursor or a risk factor for somebody to find themselves struggling with an eating disorder. Grief can also be, or eating disorder can also be maintained as a coping tool to manage the symptoms of grief. It's worth mentioning here that a lot of the research that's out there on the intersection between grief and eating disorders has to do with women in their later years of life, where grief or where loss is more normalized or more to be expected. Things like intangible loss, like or less noted loss, or obvious loss, maybe is the word I'm looking for. Divorce, empty nest, loss of career. Those things can also be risk factors associated with grief that can lend themselves to people grieving and utilizing eating disorder behaviors to try to cope. It's also important for us as eating disorder clinicians to acknowledge the losses that our clients might be experiencing that are kind of those less tangible losses as well. So, having an eating disorder, they may experience the loss of relationships, the loss of time, the loss of financial stability, and the loss of opportunities that being in a relationship with their eating disorder may have cost them. And it's healthy and validating for us to be able to have conversations that acknowledge those losses. And then, of course, we all have experienced the patient who is feeling a lot of ambiguity about, yes, I would like to move forward with recovery. And yes, I feel sadness. I feel like I feel like I'm grieving the loss of the eating disorder. And I want to emphasize that that grieving process, we want to bring that into treatment because it is a part of the recovery process. A second here to talk about ambiguous loss because I think the loss of the eating disorder really can feel ambiguous and kind of fall under that umbrella of it being not having such clear boundaries and definition. So an ambiguous loss is one that lacks clarity, right? Like it doesn't have definite boundaries about something being here and then being gone. It can kind of like uh, gradiated or shades of gray loss. There may be questioning if a true loss occurred. Maybe it's through their own invalidation, right? Like I shouldn't be sad that I'm losing this. It's ongoing in nature. It can be without closure. And so closure can be a really important thing to help to bring into somebody's experience with eating disorder loss. So here are some things that we can help our clients who are in the midst of grieving the loss of their eating disorder. Um, Emphasize again, normalizing, allowing grief to be a part of their recovery process. Acknowledging that a loss might be that it never was what they thought it was. Maybe it was never the magic bullet or the refuge or the release. Or maybe it was that, and it can no longer be that for them. I have a client who I've worked with in the past who went on Wellbutrin, and for some reason, her doctor really got it to click for her that she could no longer purge if she was going to take this medication. And we really had to do a lot of work on her grief of being able to use that. She felt really lost and really sad as being able to have that in her coping toolbox of helping her get through difficult times. um, an idea of that the eating disorder can still ride their bus. It can ride, but it can't drive. And also, and this is through the lens of IFS, I really like that approach, and I think it can help to help those experiencing grief to change the role that the eating disorder has had in their life. Sometimes I talk about how the eating disorder can now serve as like a smoke detector. So if that thought process comes into their awareness, they can use it as a warning signal that maybe they need more time or they need downtime or that they have a need that is going unmet, and really using that smoke detector as I need to tune in and see what I need. And it's giving me an opportunity to see that and to take a little more time with that. It's also important to allow space and to allow language of sadness and loss. I think we all probably do that very well, but just acknowledging and even being the one to put words to it's okay to grieve this. It's okay to feel like something is that you're losing something. And then a great thing to do is to create a ceremony or opportunity for closure. So this can be a eulogy to the eating disorder or a goodbye letter. I think that that's something I've seen done a lot with other clinicians. And borrowing kind of an idea from ISFS is using some kind of way to offer closure. Some of those approaches can be like through wind or through water or through burning the goodbye letter. Those things can kind of create, in the same way that a funeral can create opportunity for the patient to have a more symbolized closure to their experience. So let's move into therapeutic interventions. What we really want as the outcome of our work is to help the client find meaning within the loss. And we do that first through helping them to experience the emotion that they're going through and then to regulate. Here, the ability to experience emotion and regulate in the wake of emotional upset is a capacity that is important, if not essential, to adaptive grieving. So, we really want to help the person get through adaptive grieving. And we also have the opportunity to weave in positive emotion, which is also associated with adaptive grieving. I want to emphasize here that post-traumatic growth is also a goal, an ultimate goal for treatment, and that resilience is the most common response to adversity, including trauma and loss. So it's important to not to acknowledge that it's a difficult time, but also to not pathologize the difficulty, that most people are going to navigate it and come out on the other side with post traumatic growth, with strength, with resilience. And most people are going to be able to get to a place where they can see the ongoing nature of life, a new course, or still ongoing opportunities to enjoy their lives. They can experience an increased sense of personal strength. They can experience depth and growth in themselves and in their relationships. They can experience a greater appreciation for life in general and can experience a deepening of their spirituality. And I can definitely tell you that from my own personal experiences, I've seen this both in my husband's family, and I've experienced it for myself. And I know, not everybody has this experience, but I'll share mine. In losing my mother, being one of four siblings, my relationships with my siblings, the four of us, has never been stronger. So I feel like in some ways she's left us without her, but with a deepening and much more meaningful and rewarding relationship with one another because of having been through that together. Talking about grief and loss, it's important to just quickly review what we know about attachment theory. Um, the loss of attachment or the disruption is one of the most dysregulating things that can happen for us. And a normal anticipated response to that can be disorganization and despair. So if we think about what the role that the provider can play in this, is really as a stable, unafflicted person helping them to navigate growth, and can serve as a transitional attachment figure as they work through um, all of the pieces, right? The becoming the individual who they want to be on the other side of that, as they navigate their family relationships, as they build their new internal Google map. We can serve as a transitional figure for them as they learn how to move from dysregulation to regulation. And the therapist can help them to hold that experience of loss and help them scaffold. I just love that term. Help them to scaffold the skills that they need to obtain to adaptively grieve. So I'm such a huge proponent of having support and having almost outside support during a time of loss. So we want our interventions to aim at providing a steady, unafflicted place to mourn, a safe place. I have also seen family members, a year can be a long time. They can start to react to one another and feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't keep going on this way. This person's sadness is making it feel so heavy for me, and I need to be able to move forward. So you can be a space where they can share some of that, and you're not having to live the day to day of that with them. So it can be helpful for them and also for their support systems. We want to be able to allow time and space for grieving, and we want to normalize the pain. We want to normalize the difficulty that they're going through. We want to hold space for them, and we want to help them know that the disorganization and the disruption that they're feeling is part of the course, does not indicate that they're going crazy or that they will never feel better, and that we want to hold the hope for them. Many, many times I have said, I know it feels like this will never be better, and I don't want to invalidate your experience of how bad it feels right now. So, what I will do is, knowing that other people have walked through this and have gotten to the other side, I will hold the hope for both of us in this room. Also, our interventions want to give them words. We know the words name it to tame it, right? We want to help them express. Maybe it's not even through words, but we want to give them places, opportunity to express and to make sense of it. We want them to feel the emotion, um, to give space to feel the emotion, and then to also give skills to regulate, because that will happen a lot with grief. You'll feel the intensity of it and then need and be able to move on with the next right thing. Our goals and approaches are also to help the individual establish a new self and to establish a relationship with the person who's passed and to find meaning in that loss. So, if we think about our core needs as individuals, we have the need for love, we have the need for acceptance, we have the need to feel valued or to feel self worthy, we need to feel secure in our environment, and we need to feel adequate. When we can help the individual put words and to conceptualize what the loss and how the loss has impacted these core needs, they can gain a lot of insight about what they are missing, and what maybe I've seen this a lot. What maybe they are trying to force somebody else to be or to meet. Um, so maybe wanting their spouse to serve the needs that the loved one who's passed, and not realizing that they're expecting that spouse to be something that they're not. So asking questions like, how has the loss impacted you getting your needs met? Um, Noticing how are they going about getting their needs met? Asking them, what do you think you were trying to get? What need do you think you were trying to get met when you did that, or when you asked that, or when you reacted that way? Looking and asking them, how did you attempt to restore that need? And then as they get more aware, noticing that they have these needs and how they're going about them, and adjusting, kind of reestablishing how they might find these needs met. I like this approach as well. It kind of, for me, it likens itself to Erickson's stages of life, or stages of development. The grieving tasks for individuals are acceptance, moving to acceptance versus denial, avoidance, or suppression. Finding faith, trust, hope versus living in a space of fear, living in a space of anticipated trauma, or protecting themselves against further loss. Finding a place of surrender. I think of the serenity prayer here versus looking for ways to control and live in the world in a way that might protect them from losing or loss again, maybe not choosing to have their life involved with other people. And then finally, forgiveness versus anger, instead of maybe holding on to that anger about what has been lost or what has been experienced, moving into a place of forgiveness. A slide here to emphasize emotional regulation skills. Um, Grief and loss can be some of the most intense emotions that we can experience as humans. So we don't want to dig into all of this without really doing a good assessment of the emotions that somebody can tolerate, looking for what their window of tolerance is, looking for where their, as Wendy Oliver Pyatt says, one of my favorite terms of hers that I'm going to steal is the doable edge. Utilizing those skills that we know, DBT tools, ACT tools, somatic presence, even doing some of those grounding techniques where you might say, okay, describe the five senses that are around in this room. Let's have you touch the chair that you're on. How does that ground you and root you into the time and space that you're here, that we're here together? And then maybe creating safety and connection in their mind. Sometimes people can do this through pictures, through items of clothing, maybe a blanket or a sweatshirt. But for other people, these items can be too much too soon. They can flood them. So, just a plug here to make sure you're assessing and providing emotional regulation strategies as you are working through some of these big feelings. I really lean into narrative therapy and writing when I'm working with somebody who has experienced grief and loss. Some of the prompts that I use are here. What do you wish that you could tell or ask the person you've lost? So many times, I see a typo in there. My apologies for that. So many times, there's a realization that there is information that they will never get from that person, and there's a source of sadness. So just being able to put that down onto paper, maybe writing to the individual that they've lost, asking some of those questions. Um, Other prompts are here. I won't go through all of them, but those are kinds of things that can really help people to think through the depth of what they're experiencing. A lot of times I'll normalize, be in a space where you can be really tearful and write some of these things and write them out first as they're coming, kind of stream of consciousness without feeling like they need to be filtered. That's a first step. Again, finding the words. A lot of people experience or talk about the experience of wordless suffering, and creating, and I say creating meaning. Maybe it's writing, maybe it is drawing or um, sculpture or painting. How does the loss feel to them? Allowing the emotions to find a label, and allowing those emotions to be present, and give creative expression of the experience. I want to be thoughtful of time, but I did ask one of my clients if I could share some of her writing. So I'll just read a couple of these pieces of her poem, but I just felt like I was so proud of the work that she did, and proud with her for finding words to express the loss of her son. So I'll just share a little bit of it. What was it like? Were you at peace? The daily penance done, a shimmering light to illuminate the way to go back whence you had come. What was it like to see us so broken, learning life anew, without you, no words to be spoken? What is it like to see and observe all, love as the compass for endearing one's calls? Love is a constant, all that matters anyhow. Please guide us to you as only you can now know. So, if we have time, I'll circle back to this. But I feel like you can so much so feel the questioning and the uncertainty and sadness that she was feeling, but also the way that she was able to organize it into something that felt like it made sense to her. One of the most healing books that I read that was recommended to me through one of the grief certification courses that I took was Celestial Conversations, Healing Relationships After Death. And what was so neat about that experience was acknowledging that the person can write to the person that they lost, the patient can write to the person that they lost. But it also suggested that the person that they lost could write back to them through them. So oftentimes now I will take that and say, what do you think your son would want you to know about that thought? And a lot of times it shows up so similarly to how we might utilize wise mind. And there can be so much healing. So, something like, do you think that your son wants you to hold guilt about not being present on the day he passed? Will generate a response, something similar to, no, no, he knows how much I loved him. And just being able to pull that up has so much healing power for that person. More prompts for us here. So, reflection, opportunity to look at who was I before this loss? Who was I through the loss? Maybe it's an illness. We can even think about these things through the lens of eating disorder. Who was I before the eating disorder? Who was I during? Um, how have my team members, family members, support system helped me to become? Who am I in the process of becoming now? Who do I want to be now? So both through the lens of eating disorder loss and through the lens of loved one loss, these can provide interesting discussion and interesting journal prompts for patients to really gain perspective into what their experience has been like and the work that they are doing. Okay, so I'll take a minute here to just talk through takeaways, and then we'll leave about 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So takeaway points. What I hope that you will take away from this is it is normal for grief to take time. If we can set our expectations around that year mark. And not pathologize anything that comes up, and I'm quick to emphasize this because early in my career before I had ever experienced grief and had the one maybe class at the most on grief. I had an experience as a young clinician with a psychologist who came in to do supervision for us, and I had a client whose father had passed away from a traumatic situation, really unexpectedly. I think he flipped over the handlebars of his bicycle, hit his head, and was no longer alive after a very short amount of time from that. And that client, it was probably about 18 months out. And he really broke down in my office and had a huge, just crying, and I could just feel the sadness that was coming from him. And so I wanted to process that and get guidance as a young clinician. And I distinctly remember that clinician guiding me, that saying that your patient should be over that now. And I ran with that. And it wasn't until I had those experiences and dove into learning about grief that I realized that I was really misguided with that. And that that was just a time and a place where he was experiencing the depth of that circumstance, and that there was nothing pathological about it. So I really want to emphasize that here, that incredible pain and suffering is normal for a time. Um, there is prolonged grief disorder. That's a whole other topic. There's a whole other set of interventions that are helpful with that. But within the time frame of the year, the suffering is going to be can be very intense, and it can not be for other people too. Um, and I want to emphasize that oftentimes the grief itself doesn't shrink, but what grows is the capacity to be present with it, is the capacity for it to be there and to also not throw the person off their course of their life. And if you've ever seen maybe the grief is a rock in a jar, and the jar is maybe this big, the rock stays the same size, but the jar grows, and that really is a really helpful tool and picture to demonstrate how that the capacity can grow. Clinicians, you have an incredible ability to support a griever. I know it can sometimes feel like, oh, I'm not sure I could do this, let alone how am I supposed to help somebody through this? But even your presence, even your ability to be completely with them and allow them to leave it all in your office or in your session can provide tremendous healing for them. And then being able to recognize that grief is a very common experience for individuals who are experiencing eating disorders, and that when we can approach that with the same compassion, um, that we can really help facilitate healthy recovery for the patients that we work with. Okay, I will leave you with another meaningful quote for me. Mostly it is loss which teaches us about the worth of things. Resources for you if you'd like them. And then, of course, like always, please don't hesitate to reach out if I can give you more information or if something stood out to you and you'd like to know more.
Thank you, Rebecca, for a wonderful presentation on such sensitive subject matter. We do have time for one or two questions, and this was a question that just came in, and this is a really good question. It says, you mentioned how the caregiver can need the support of the clinician, but how do we as clinicians show up in those sessions, and what do you feel is an appropriate amount to share with the client who is experiencing grief?
Yeah, boy, those are such good questions. Okay, so the first part of that was, will you read that first part?
Yes, it said you mentioned how the clinician can be a good place for caregivers to receive support, but how, as a clinician, do you determine how much you should disclose with your own grief in your sessions?
Okay, okay, yeah. If you've heard me speak before, you know I really operate under the lens of IFS, and I really operate under the theoretical approaches of schema. The schema approach says that the human part of us is really much more important. So kind of like disclosure in every setting, right? We look at it to see, does it have benefit to the patient. We ask for permission and let them know, I might disclose something to you that I think could be of benefit. Can I do that? Does that feel comfortable for you? And then I think another rule of thumb and just disclosure is um, make it brief and tie it back to their experience. So I think those are helpful. Those are guidelines that I follow sometimes, but I have found it with grief, especially, that even having a sense of knowing what it was like gives a lot of buy-in to the patient.
Thank you. And you're also getting a lot of love in the chat. They're
Yeah,
saying this
those are
talk
so
on
great.
grief was handled with such compassion and clarity. Thank you. Excellent presentation, so heartfelt. Thank you, Rebecca. Everyone is just showing you a lot of love. And again, thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, we did attach a handout that you can access in your CEO dashboard. And once you complete the evaluation form, you will be given a link so that you can download your certificate. And so, without further ado, we'll let you all go. And again, thank you. And please remember to follow us on our social media platforms so that you can stay in tune to our next upcoming presentations. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everyone.